Jews. So let's come now to the question of anti-Semitism today. In all the years that I've been following, researching, policy, advising, writing about anti-Semitism, I've never seen in Europe the level of attention, concern, debate, anxiety, and panic about the problem as high as it has been in the last months. And there have been some terrible and shocking headline-grabbing incidents, grave and murderous anti-Jewish hostility, the killing of 3 people at the Belgian Jewish Museum in May 2014, the killing of 4 kosher supermarket in Paris, killing of the security guard at the synagogue in Copenhagen on 15th of February. There's also reports from the Jewish monitoring groups of increase in incidents, surveys showing high levels of anti-Semitic sentiment, and evidence of fear, and that fear focused greatly on France and on the Jews that are apparently leaving France for safe haven in Israel. But giving some credence to this, what does it all mean? What does it all add up to? If anyone has been reading the headlines, not only in Europe, but I think here in America too, have painted a very bleak, a very alarming picture. For example, The Guardian in London, anti-Semitism on the rise across Europe in the worst times since the Nazis. The rising tide of anti-Semitism, that was the New York Times. Why Europe's Jews are fleeing once again, that was Newsweek. Jewish history in Europe is at the beginning of its end. A number of papers quoting Natan Sharansky, the chairman of the Jewish Agency. Anti-Semitism in the 21st century is a ticking time bomb. There was an article in the New Republic by the French public intellectual Bernard Levy. And another quote, the similarities with Kristallnacht, 1938 Kristallnacht, can't be ignored. That's Abe Foxman, the ADL. Now, are these headlines justified? When I read them, time to pack your bags, time to start worrying. You should have been worrying already for a long time. We can begin to answer this by looking, if I may, strangely, may seem to you, at a few more headlines. Let me just read out a few more headlines. The threat to the safety and security of the Jewish people is as great, if not greater, than what was faced in the 1930s. That's our friend Abe Foxman again. An anti-Jewish atmosphere has pervaded the entire world. That was a headline in the Ma'ariv, the Israeli newspaper. The new anti-Semitism. Is Europe in the grip of the worst bout of hatred since the Holocaust? It was The Guardian again in London. And finally, France is awash in the wildest anti-Semitism. That was an Israeli Prime Minister. Now, these latter ones that I read out, they're as alarming, I'm sure you'll agree, as the first ones, if not more so. But the difference is, I wonder whether anyone might know what the difference is between the first ones and the last ones. Well, obviously, the first ones I read out were from the last 12 months. The last 4 I read out were from 2001 to 2003. They could have all been recent, they could have all been in the papers and magazines recently. But it clearly begs the question, does it not? If this time's worst is worse than the worst they said it was last time, what does that mean? And how many times can it be just like before the Holocaust? Or reminiscent of Kristallnacht? I mean, aren't we getting into a position where this is crying wolf? And of course the media have a responsibility here, because as in my experience as someone who, in my role as running a think tank, tried to put out information about anti-Semitism and get media coverage for it, they only want to know that anti-Semitism rises. They're not interested in when it's diminishing. Try and sell them the story, oh, anti-Semitism going down. No. But when they can write headlines like that, they'll write headlines like that. So let's get one thing clear. There is no wave, in my view. There's no rising tide of anti-Semitism it's not like Kristallnacht. Jews aren't fleeing. The fact that some may be leaving, and there's a lot of question marks about those French Jews, whether they already have homes there, whether they've gone to live permanently, whether they're like a lot of Jews in France, they come and go, as many Jews in Britain do. And Jewish history is, I have to tell you, my friends, very far from nearing its end in Europe. But there is a real threat. There's a real threat to life and limb from a tiny number of jihadists and extreme Islamists. The numbers of anti-Jewish incidents have increased in the last 6 months of 2014, but this occurs every time violent confrontations occur between Israel and Gaza, Israel and Hezbollah, Israel and West Bank Palestinians, and afterwards the numbers fall back. This is a phenomenon that we've seen certainly since the turn of the century, and even going back a little further than that. And there are other signs of the continuing threats to Jews and Jewish life in Europe. There's the rise of extreme nationalist populist parties, Jobbik in Hungary, Golden Dawn in Greece, Svoboda in Ukraine, that are openly anti-Semitic, who are putting out openly anti-Semitic propaganda or spreading it there, or sometimes deny it, but it's quite obviously there for people to see. Though traditional neo-fascist and neo-Nazi parties like the Front National in France and the National Alliance in Italy have kind of parked their anti-Jewish rhetoric, and they've fallen in love with Israel, and they feel that they're Israel's best friends, all in the cause of focusing enmity on their primary target now, which is Islam and Muslims in Europe. The less extreme populists, parties in Sweden, the Netherlands, Denmark, also love Israel. This is, again, very much one of their key messages for the same reasons. Because Israel is their ally as they see it in their fight against Muslims in Europe and Islamic influence. What is new in recent years, of course, is the explosion of anti-Semitic comment on social media. I'm not sure what it's like here in America, but certainly you go to any of the threads on some of the publications, particularly we're talking about the unmoderated threads, but even on moderated threads, anti-Semitic comments come through. And that is something which is a relatively new phenomenon. It's not entirely new. Whether it means that it's a rise in anti-Semitism, or whether it means that people who are already anti-Semitic have found and are using this new way of expressing their views which they didn't have before, is, I think, an important thing that one has to consider. The point that I'm making here by talking about real anti-Semitism, to put it that way, is that we have to take anti-Semitism seriously. I don't think we should allow the Israel connection, however problematic it is, to deflect us from this and do something about it. Anti-Semitism is still a serious problem in Europe. It's not the way it's been presented by the Israelis. It's not the way it's been presented by many of the mainstream Jewish organizations. The problem is keeping it in perspective. We forget, for example, how serious anti-Semitism was in the decades after the war in Europe. There was widespread discrimination against Jews in some Western countries. I know this in Britain, for example, that there were quotas in public schools. That means, as you probably know, in private schools you have to pay to go to what's called a public school in Britain. There were quotas in those schools for the number of Jews that they would allow in right up into the early 1970s. Somehow that's kind of forgotten. People don't seem to remember. Then, of course, the suppression of Jewish life and Jewish communities almost universally in the communist bloc. Of course, it was a bit different from country to country. And anti-Semitism was suppressed. I mean, it wasn't, communism liked to present itself as getting rid of it completely. It didn't. It kind of put clampers on it and kept it under the surface. But it did turn it on when when it wanted to. 1968, Poland, 20,000 Jews were basically forced out of Poland under the guise of anti-Zionism, as the Polish government called it at the time. It was actually just disguised anti-Semitism. And of course there's past violence against Jews that people don't remember. In London, attack on a very prominent Jewish figure, Lord Seif, in 1973, attack on the Israel ambassador in 1982, in France, the Rue Copernic synagogue, bombing Paris 1980, when 4 were killed, assault on a restaurant, Goldenberg restaurant in the Marais, which is a Jewish area of Paris in August 1982. So people have a short memory when they're talking about rises in anti-Semitism. And many people actually fall for a discourse, which you may hear here, that what happened was anti-Semitism went away after the war, because of the shock of the Holocaust and everyone suddenly realizing how terrible anti-Semitism was and shouldn't be anti-Semitic. And so it went away, but now it's back with a vengeance. This is something that you hear a lot. And this has a subtext, because it actually opens the door to the new anti-Semitism theory, because people who subscribe to that theory can say, well, it went away, and now it's come back, vengeance in a new guise, which is the new anti-Semitism guise. What we also forget is how the position of Jews in the world has been transformed since the war. There's now no discrimination to speak of against Jews. They have full protection under the law, most countries, thriving in every conceivable walk of life across the continent of Europe. There's no state-sponsored anti-Semitism, quite the contrary, powerful commitment to protect Jews, even if it's not always effective, but it's the same for other minorities, if not worse. The protection that they have is not good. Jews have full equal civil rights, unlike for Muslims. States where the Jews live don't question whether they belong, but questioning of whether Muslims belong is rife in Europe. There's laws against incitement to racial hatred and anti-Semitism, laws against Holocaust denial, and we see from the media, actually, that societies are still sensitized to the issue of anti-Semitism, because, again, it's a favorite argument of many of the people who subscribe to the anti-Semitism idea that, oh, no one is listening to us, no one cares about it, but you can see from the headlines, and they're amazing, and I've collected, it's a habit of mine, I keep collecting articles on anti-Semitism, and there's just been an outpouring of programs as well on radio and television.